When you're first getting started with the AWS CDK or probably any CDK in general, it can look very, I guess, intimidating is the best word, because once you initialize a new app from the terminal, there's a plethora of files that get created, directories that get created. I mean, it's kind of a lot. So how do you navigate through it and how do you figure out what does what? That's exactly what this video is going to be about. So let's jump into VS Code and take a look at the files and directories that get created when we use the AWS CDK. All right, so I have VS Code open here, and as you can see, I just have this directory. It's literally sitting on my desktop right now. It's just called demo app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run CDK init app, and then I'm going to specify my language, and I'm going to use Python. So now notice here, there's nothing here, right? Like there's no directories or no files, anything. So let's go ahead and run that. And wow, a lot of stuff gets created, right? I mean, there's a ton of stuff in here. So like, how do we kind of figure out what's, happening? Well, let's start from the beginning. First, you have this .venv folder. And what that does is that's the Python virtual environment, or pipenv, if you want to use that Python virtual environment instead of, running your code locally. Like maybe you want to install one of the AWS CDK libraries like the S3 library or EC2, whatever, and you don't want that to be local. Well, you can spin up your virtual environment and do that. And the CDK init app comes with the virtual environment. Next, we have the demo app directory here. And now notice it's the same name as the directory that you're in, and that's by design. I'm actually going to save this until the end because I kind of want to go through everything, and this directory here is kind of going to wrap up the rest of the files. So then you have your Git Ignore, and this makes sense, right? This is all kind of figured out for you. So for example, let's actually start at the bottom here where the CDK asset staging directory. Number one, you don't need to commit the CDK out file or the staging to, GitHub. There's no reason for that because nobody else is going to use that. Next, in your Git Ignore, you have a bunch of stuff in here, but what I'm thinking about here is the .venv folder. Now this does make sense. Like maybe if this application is being deployed to say, some serverless service or an EC2 instance or something like that, you're not going to be running it in a virtual environment. That virtual environment is really if you want to test stuff locally. Next, let's open up the app.py. Now for the app.py, this is really the file that's going to be running your CDK application. So if I scroll down here, you can see, it's just utilizing app here. And then as you can see, this is a class that's going to be utilizing what you're actually creating. And that of course comes from importing the AWS CDK. And then right down here, app.synth. So synth is to essentially create, what the CloudFormation template is going to look like. And that ensures that everything is up to speed, up to par. Does everything look good in the app? If not, the synth is of course going to error out. It's kind of almost like a quick check. So when you're looking at the app.py, this is really what's going to be used to run your application. Now, from what I've seen, I mean, there are definitely a few things that you can do in here to change things up and switch it up. You got some examples here and stuff. If you're just running a standard CDK app, to be honest with you, you probably don't need to change all that much in here. There's a lot of times where I don't change anything at all in here. Next, if I open up the cdk.json, this is going to utilize all of the packages that I'm using for the AWS CDK. Next, we have our Readme, of course, and again, this comes all pre-configured here for your Readme, but if this is specifying a specific application or something like that, of course, you're going to want to edit that up. Next, you have your requirements.txt. Now, if you're not familiar with Python, your requirements.txt are the mandatory libraries. So those are the libraries that you're going to want to be using throughout your application. Next, you have your setup.py, and what setup is doing is it's importing setup tools, and setup tools is used to describe your application, your version, the description of it, the author, everything like that. This is essentially, just the description file. And then if you're running on Windows, you're going to have that source.bat for you. Now, the one thing that I do want to do is I want to open up the demo app now, and I want to show you what's happening. Now, of course, we have our init.py. This is telling Python that this is supposed to be a package, and we want to be able to use that package. But more importantly, this is really where the magic happens. This is the secret sauce here. Your demo underscore app, or whatever the directory is called, essentially the file that ends with stack.py, this is where you're going to be writing the code for the application. So if you're creating an S3 bucket, for example, you're going to be putting that right here, right where it says on line 15, the code that defines your stack. That's literally what this is for. This file is the secret sauce. This is the one that you're going to be using to write the code to create whatever services you're running in AWS. Now, the reason why I wanted to keep this at the end is because really, of course, all of the other directories and files, like those are all important. Those are all needed for the app to run. But in terms of what you have to edit, this is pretty much it. You're going to leave everything the same from line 13 up. You're going to leave the same. Of course, you can delete the comments if you want to. And then starting on line 15 here, this is where you're going to start writing the code to deploy your stack. So these are all the files and directories that are going to pop up when you're creating a application with CDK using Python.